Balanceology presents Burnout to Brilliance, formerly the Art of Balance Burnout Podcast.
Season 4, Episode 1, Burnout-Free Working with Dr Richard Duggins. Welcome, Richard. It's such a great pleasure to have you here with me on the podcast. And as I was devouring your book, literally, it jumped out at me early on about your opinion of the word resilience. At the end of the last season, we had a guest, Kyneka Townsend, and we delved into resilience in quite a big way, because similarly, the kind of mainstream interpretation of that word, or the way that that's portrayed, was quite jarring for her. And I'm really thought it'd be a nice way to link the two series together if we started there in relation to burnout, with your own sense of that word resilience, where it's perhaps problematic, where it's useful, what it really means.
Yes, thanks, Jane. It's wonderful to join you here, and that was an excellent podcast, and it's great to link to that episode. So for resilience for me, I think has been misused. So resilience does make sense as long as we think about resilience as something that happens between people, not something that happens inside people, something that is resilience is not an individual characteristic, and therefore it's not an individual weakness, it's not an individual failing. And that's really, really important. And what we've had is some organizations saying to their staff, actually, it's you who needs to be more resilient. You need to go on another resilience course. You need to do another online training, and then everything will be fine. And staff see that, and employees see that often as almost victim blaming, almost saying the problem isn't with the amount of hours you're working or the support you're getting. The problem's with you, really. So you just need to kind of suck it up. You need to keep on swimming and sort it out yourself. And the problem with that is it doesn't work. So I think it's one of the reasons why we've got such incredibly high burnout rates at the moment. But the other problem with it is it makes things worse. So it means that if people are feeling the pressure at work and they are starting to have problems with stress or burnout, they feel it's a shameful thing. They feel it's their problem, their weakness, and they put their heads down. They don't reach out for help, and they struggle alone with it, and that's awful.
I'd never heard it put that way, Richard, this idea of it being something that exists between people. It made me sort of think of the damage I think that's been done actually in our society, in our workplace cultures, where people are ending up in sort of silos, working, feeling alone. It's not often spoken about loneliness as a contributing factor to burnout, but studies show it's really significant. And the difference when there is actually connection, and when people are able to collaborate, work together, and truly care about each other, then that resilience is able to build, but it being about something that happens in connection. I thought it was rather beautiful when you shared that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we're at high risk of burnout if that connection isn't there, but also the way we protect ourselves from burnout and the way we recover is through that connection. It is through those relationships. Yeah.
Yes. And ironically, I think often when somebody is burning out, and you shared that phenomenal model in your book, The Exhaustion Funnel, where you indicated how we have sort of work and chores and rest and play, and then we sort of spiral down a level and we lose the play, we keep the work, the rest and the chores, and then it goes down another level and it just ends up being the work and the chores and then eventually the work. And I guess there's that aspect in that funnel of where when it is just work, it's more difficult to reach out to those that are closest to us, connect with them, with presence, we lose the ability to be present actually with others, don't we?
I think, yes, absolutely. I would expect we both see it an awful lot with people we're supporting in our work, and it's a pattern that happens again and again. And yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that happen, I think, is that high-performing professionals protect what they see as their must-dos, and their must-dos are often work. And so to protect work, they cut down on the things that they see as optional, which is that play, that rest, that time outside work. They borrow their performance for work out from there, and that sends you down this recovery funnel. And yes, I think it does make you isolated, because if you're just at work and you're just putting your head down and you're working those extra hours, you do become isolated from your communities, from your colleagues. I often meet quite a lot of health professionals where they say, you know, they've noticed that because they're putting the extra hours in at work and then working more intensely, they're no longer going to the coffee room. They're no longer having those chats with their colleagues. So that makes you isolated. But also, I think the shame of struggling makes you isolated. People think, well, I'm embarrassed because I'm struggling. It's a weakness. I'm letting my colleagues down, and that makes people more isolated too.
Yeah. I can really feel the compassion you have for those in that sort of situation, because it's systemic, isn't it? It's not something that we can fix on our own either. And I think that's one of the really difficult things when somebody does find themselves in burnout and attempt to transition back to an environment where they encountered the struggles in the first place. It's difficult to, even if they've resourced themselves, to then sustainably stay there or meet the challenges there, because if the workplace culture isn't taking on board that there is burnout occurring in that culture, then things don't change sufficiently enough for that individual to flourish in that space. I often see it like a cycle, unless something in the environment changes.
I agree with that. You were when you were saying that, you were sparking off all sorts of experiences I've had. I think if you are burning out because there's too much going on at work for too long and the working hours and support aren't there, then it does often require a brave and courageous conversation if you're working within an organization perhaps with your line manager or with colleagues or senior colleagues about actually this balance isn't working for me. And sometimes changes are made, and sometimes I've seen people do that, and people have said, well, we have seen you've been taking on an awful lot. We know it's been difficult, and actually let's make some changes. Let's have a look at things. It's a bit sad that the individual has to reach out, that you'd hope the organization would reach in, but sometimes changes can happen, but they don't always happen. And sometimes those conversations that are difficult require quite a bit of effort to make that. The other thing I was when you were talking about relationships and recovery, it reminded me of one of the services I work in is NHS Practitioner Health, which is a national service for health professionals. It's an NHS service, and there was a researcher called Dr. Pippa Shaw who did some research there, and she interviewed doctors who'd recovered from burnout, and they talked very much about part of their recovery was reaching out to what they called finding their people. So finding people at work who shared their values, but also finding people in their community who shared their values. And actually, when they started reaching out and looking for them, some people were there. And sometimes it didn't require them changing roles or changing their job, but sometimes it did.
Yeah, I love that. The reaching in part, I feel will stay with me beyond the interview as well, because there's a beautiful section in the book towards the end where you talk about the things that organizations can do to prevent, detect, and act in order to change things systemically. And part of that included some suggestions around setting things up in workplaces so that individuals could connect and be able to be safely sharing with each other. And you mentioned about a piece of psychological education that's often required as part of that, so that there's an appreciation from the top down that's needed and valued, and that there's an understanding there around this. I wonder if you could speak a bit more to that.
Yeah. So absolutely, we know our organizations thrive when their staff thrive. So it's a
Right.
basic principle. So organizations should be very interested in their staff thriving, and because they're more productive, they give better customer services, there's less errors and mistakes, all sorts of reasons I could go on and on about. But but yes, but really you need a culture. So in the prevent bit, you need a culture and a leadership and team working that recognizes well-being of staff and their staff thriving as a priority and really looks towards that. And we know that the culture is important. We know that the senior leaders and the boards of organizations set the tone for the organization. So if you're fortunate enough to be in an organization where the senior leaders are taking this importantly, then we know the staff in that organization will be much healthier and do a lot better. But it's also and so it is how you get them to take it more seriously. Some organizations have got remarkable senior leaders who've burnt out themselves and are saying,
Right.
I'm not going to have that happen to myself again or my staff. But you can't rely on that. So you need that education, I agree. But also the education for the team and the line managers. Line managers are really important here, but they're also probably one of the most stressed members of our organization. So how do we free them up to have time to care for their staff so their staff can care for the customers or clients? So I think that's where education comes in. And there's good evidence that if you do quite brief training with line managers, but also with teams, that they can be much better at looking after their own health, but also spotting in their colleagues when their colleagues are struggling. And the importance of spotting it in your colleagues is you can help your colleagues address things early, so they don't kind of suffer in silence and become, as their burnout worsens and worsens, and then they might end up developing anxiety or depression or even physical complications of stress. So that's another key reason why that education is important.
Yeah, I think that can make a huge difference in workplaces, and it's the difference between a workplace doing something that's just a sort of tick box exercise. I think you call it well-being washing in your book, and doing something that's actually impactful. And so those sorts of trainings, I think, are so much more impactful than giving people access to a yoga class or doing a general talk about well-being, but then the onus still being on the individual rather than looking at how do we actually care for each other here together.
Yeah, it reminds me of someone I met a couple of years ago who, and I do see this quite a lot, but he captured it. He said, I'm so fortunate that I work within a team where every day someone asks me how I am.
Oh.
And he says, the reason I'm so fortunate is because actually things have been fine. It's been great. But over the last few months, things have not been fine. There's been a lot going on at work, a lot going on at home. But because my team asked me how I am, I was able to tell them, I was able to think with them, and I was able to come through to you for support. So there is something, I think, about those teams where there are relationships, we're interested in how each other are doing, we're regularly checking in with each other, where you can pick things up early and you can get people to the right support. And that's about culture, isn't it? It's about a
It really
positive
is.
team culture.
Yes, and valuing the time, slowing things down enough at the beginning of when we come together to actually check in, to as you say, not that there would necessarily need to be something that's off kilter, but if we build it there as a given that we're going to ask and care, then trust and rapport will build. And when there is something that is pressing, whether that's in the workplace or at home or a combination of both, people feel safe to be able to share it, because that psychological safety has been built through those moments. That I think that's, you've put that so lovely. It's made me think on different activities I do within the coaching space, as ways of checking in, ice breaking, but also working with metaphor so that people don't feel they need to expose themselves, by explicitly stating how they actually are. So often we'll say something like, what's the weather like in your head today? Or maybe somebody will check in using an object, and the object will represent a part of them subconsciously that maybe it is feeling stressed, or is feeling strong, or is feeling playful, or whatever it is that might come through that, but they might find it more difficult to actually verbalize that without some sort of stimulus or some sort of means to bring themselves into the space. I've just wondered about that, how equipped are organizations in doing that? Probably not very yet, but I guess that's the value of the work that we do.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm a massive fan of metaphor. I love metaphor. But I think there is something about metaphor that does bring a playfulness and a creativity to how we talk with each other. But we do need a little bit of safety to do that, don't we? And trust.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And like you said in your book as well, that needs to be role modeled from the top down, as much as it's important to kind of to manage up as well. It's difficult if others aren't leading by example. We feel like we don't have the permission to go there, or to do whatever the thing is, even if the thing is eating our lunch, going for our proper lunch break, or taking our full vacation, or things that, if people at the top are cutting out on aspects that are something we need for balance, then we feel we need to do the same. So it's challenging. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was wondering, when you were sharing about the person that you said had valued that trusting space to be able to share, and it meant that one day when he did have a lot going on at work, but also you said at home in his personal life as well, the fact that I think there can be quite a lot of onus on work and the kind of occupational side of burnout, that of course can be one of the dominant reasons somebody does reach burnout, but it's not always exclusively occupational. I mean, I think it's rarely exclusively occupational. I just wondered if you might feel to say anything about that.
So absolutely. So for the last 2 decades, I've worked in kind of services supporting, NHS services supporting people with burnout and mental health problems at work. And it is almost never just to do with work. So I often find that people are able to manage one thing going, one change in their life. But if there's change in multiple areas of their life, so at work and at home, and maybe in other areas about how they feel about their work, it's that when it tends to overwhelm people, and it tends to start putting them into kind of problem, stress and burnout. I'd absolutely agree. So it's usually multiple things going on that affect people over quite a sustained period of time. I talk about in the book about based on a model of a US psychiatrist called Laura Dunn, who talks about radiators and drains, and radiators are things that radiate emotional energy, so they're things that keep you resilient, protect you against burnout, but the drains are the things that make it more likely that you will burn out. It's about the balance between that. Perfect podcast we were talking about that on. And but I say in that the drains there's 3 key drains. What's going on at work, so intensity, pressure, support, but also what's going on at home, and those can be those everyday pressures at home, but they can also be those big pressures at home that will come to all of us, of change, dispute, bereavement, and we are one person, so it all adds up. The third drain is about how we feel about our work, which is about the culture at work, the leadership at work, the support, the fairness. So that's the third drain. To be complete, the radiators are, as you might expect, they're much less about the individual. They're about what's going on around the individual, but they are about your social support, both your support at work and home, fun and social times. And we can have fun at work as well as outside work. And the last thing is whether we are intellectually stimulated by an aspect of our work. Now, it doesn't have to be all of our work, but it's really important if there can be at least a period in the week that really kind of inspires us about our work. And for different people, that will be different things. It might be training, it might be having an apprentice, it might be research or something like that.
I think that's really useful to bring into the conversation, actually, because sometimes less is said about what can happen if we aren't getting that stimulation. I've heard some people refer to it as rust out that can occur if we're not feeling that sense of fulfillment, satisfaction. We're not firing up and using the things that we maybe instinctively have as aspects of ourselves that we are really good at, that we, when we're in our sort of zone of genius or excellence. I think that's really useful to note. The other thing that occurred to me is that in that missing connection, often I think a feeling of belonging can be absent. And I guess that goes back to what we said a little bit earlier about loneliness, and that could be for all sorts of reasons, of course.
Incredibly protective against burnout, that feeling of belonging.
I couldn't help but think about the World Health Organization's sort of framing of burnout. We've sort of touched on the fact that it isn't exclusively occupational, and usually there will be other things in the background that go on. And the other thing that struck me in your book, when I think about the World Health Organization and the dimensions that they have around exhaustion and the aspects of resentment that can build up sometimes when burnout's in the mix, but also productivity. And they talk about how personal efficacy will decline. And yet I was sort of reassured when I was reading your book, because a lot of the time with the clients I work with, there isn't an evident decline in productivity. People would work and work and work and work, as you suggest with that funnel. That becomes the main area that they are putting effort into. And then all of a sudden, they're meeting all of the key performance indicators until one day they don't, and they just fall off a cliff. And I'd referred to it that way in the past myself, but never seen an actual model for that, or had the sort of science to back it up. It had just been my observations. So when you shared about the burnout cliff in your book, and I realised we haven't mentioned the title of it, so I will be saying that over and over again from now on. So it's Burnout-Free Working is the book, and I'll make sure it's in the show note comments as well. Yeah, I wonder if you could share a little more about your experiences, how that model came to be.
That model came to be through me observing exactly what you observed. So I've been lucky enough to be working in these services for a couple of decades. And one of the great things about being in our roles is people come to you and they give you the privilege of telling you their stories. And over the last 2 decades, I've had the privilege of listening to tens of thousands of hours of stories. And what I noticed is, although everyone was bringing different life experiences to me, they were describing, about 3/4 of them were describing a similar pattern. And that pattern was what I changed into that diagram, which was the burnout cliff.
Right.
And I initially started kind of putting this back to people in workshops and presentations, and people were saying, that's exactly what happened to me. So what the burnout cliff is exactly as you've said, is that although I've always worked in NHS services where people can self-refer and we see people quickly, people tend to come forward for help when things have got really bad. So either they're just about to go off work, or worried they are going to, or more likely they've just gone off work.
Yes.
And that's the cliff. And the cliff is where suddenly their performance drops. And it usually takes them by surprise, usually takes their colleagues by surprise. No one sees it coming. And it's often over a few hours or a few days. I talk about somebody in the book who just drove to work and they were sat in the car park and they just couldn't go in.
Yeah.
It was like my mind's willing, but my body is not letting me.
Say no.
So what happens is when you listen to people at the burnout cliff, is they say, actually, this has been going on for months, if not years. I've been managing with doing too much for too long with too little support at work. And I've been getting increasingly stressed, starting with problem stress, then moving through different levels of burnout, and then maybe moving into anxiety or depression. But it's and that builds up on what I call the plateau. And then there's usually a straw that breaks the camel's back. It can be quite a small thing, and then people hit the cliff. So that's the model, and it comes from just hours and hours of observation. And the reason I share it is that I believe that rather than having to go along the plateau until the straw that breaks the camel's back sends us off the cliff, actually we could do something before we reach it. So the whole idea of burnout-free working is, what can we do to avoid us hitting that burnout cliff? So what can we learn from people who've been there?
Yes.
That would have avoided that catastrophic kind of collapse in performance that we see at the cliff. And there are things that we can do and we can learn then. And people share it with me. And the people who get very good at not burning out again are the people who've previously burnt out, because they don't want to go there again. What I would say, although the burnout cliff is a catastrophic drop in performance, as I'm sure you see as well, Jayne, I'd be interested to know your perspective on this, is actually if you go through for the right sort of help, your recovery is very good. So burnout is not a career ender. It's not something that should overly panic people, although it is very unpleasant. Because if you go through the right support, your recovery will be quicker than you expect, and you'll do very well. But it's best avoided in the first place if we can.
Yes. And I think what you said there about, that's always been my hope. And sort of 20 years ago, similar sort of span of time, whenever I first learned about burnout, it was because I had burned out myself, but I didn't know I'd burned out when I burnt out, because at that stage that wasn't in the vocabulary. There weren't World Health Organization frameworks. And it wasn't until a few years into coaching and clients coming in referring to themselves as having burned out, that I started joining the dots together and thought, if only I'd known about this, maybe I wouldn't have had to drop off the cliff to learn where that edge was. Because I think I thought I could just keep burning the candle at both ends. I was in my 20s and that would be fine, because that's what everyone around me seemed to be doing, and until I couldn't burn it anymore, and there I was. And so I think there is something about people being able to learn from the experiences of those that are brave enough to share that they've been there. And also sometimes, sadly, even with that, people need to somehow meet their edge sometimes, it seems, to be able to learn that for themselves. And I do think those that learn that and haven't had really dramatic health implications as a result are fortunate, because I think, as you say, they really can rebuild and come back. I'll often call it like a sort of phoenix from the ashes, really can and really soar afterwards, because suddenly they then are aware, that's what I need to watch out for. And my body was helping me all along, and there were all the warning signs. And as you say, I think it does require often that precise support that helps individuals to recognize and surface what was really going on and what was at the root of it. Because if they don't get to that, even though they've had the burnout experience, it can manifest itself in a different way the next time, and it can take them by surprise. Because the signs and symptoms aren't necessarily always the same, right? The second time round, the body's so clever. It's like, they didn't listen that time, so we'll try a different route this time to tell them.
We know the people who make the best burnout recoveries and are less likely to burn out in the future are the people who, when they burn out, have time to reflect and pause, and also have good support around them. So I think if you have that, then, as you say, you can make that different approach. Whereas if you just kind of ignore it, try and get back to work as soon as possible, don't make any changes, then you run a risk of encountering it again. There's one of my heroes in burnout is a psychoanalyst called Herbert Freudenberger, and he coined the word burnout back in the 1960s. And he said, as you are, that actually he saw burnout as something hopeful. And he said, he's American, and he said it's like a cease and desist. So it's like that kind of legal term that forces people to stop, reflect, pause, ask themselves what their value, what their purpose, what their calling is, and then they can set off in a new direction, a new way of approaching things. So I think it's really important. I love the phoenix from the burnout flames idea. Yeah.
I think that's such a lovely note for us to close on, Richard, that sense of reigniting hope, rekindling hope. For those that are listening that feel that they maybe are heading towards that cliff, or they have met the cliff and they're wondering, how do I put myself back together? I really feel that I'm sure is something they can take with them to help rebuild and soar again, but in a different way. Not trying to desperately get back to where things were before they fell off the cliff, which is often what I meet when I'm first working with somebody, is this illusion that was a great place to be. It's about finding a different way, a new way, as you say. So thank you again. Such a fabulous book, and I'm so grateful for the contribution of work that you're sharing in the world. I love what you said about burnout hero. You're definitely a burnout hero to me. So thank you. And thank you for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Jayne. It's been so enjoyable.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Burnout to Brilliance. I hope today's conversation offered you insight, comfort, or a spark of inspiration to carry into your week. If you enjoyed the episode, please do take a moment to follow the podcast, share it with someone who might benefit, write a review, and connect with me, Jayne Morris MCC and Balanceology, over on LinkedIn or at balanceology.uk, where you'll find more tools, training, and community support. Remember, burnout isn't the end of your story. It's an invitation to rewrite it. Until next time, sending you my warmest wishes. Please do stay connected. And together, let's keep creating the communities of care that have the real power to help us collectively move from burnout to brilliance.
This episode of Burnout to Brilliance was brought to you by Balanceology. Your reviews really do help other people find our podcast. Please do take a moment to share some love and recommend us to a friend, family member, or colleague. Thank you.